Hi, welcome back to the Weekly Why. This week we're actually finishing the book of Vayechi, finishing the book of Genesis with Parsha Vayechi. Now it's interesting, there's a couple ideas I want to talk about. Basically we have here Jacob, the family patriarch, made famous of course by the Donny Osmond tale. But that of course is Jacob and Joseph, the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But basically we have Jacob here and his 12 sons, and he's on his deathbed. And Jacob is saying some rather interesting things. So he basically seems to be taking this trip down memory lane. And I'll read you some of the things he said. He said to Joseph, his son, he says, God appeared to me in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me, and he said to me, I will make you fertile, numerous, and I will make you a community of people. In other words, he's recounting this tale of in the past when God appeared to Jacob and basically, told him that his descendants would be large in number. He also, this isn't the only story he's talking about. He's talking about, I want to be buried here. He starts talking about Abraham and Sarah and the cave. He's talking a lot about the past. This seems a little out of place in terms of you're on your deathbed. God forbid, this is your last moment. You want to share some important advice. You want to tell something. Are you suddenly going to be sharing your stories from 1943 when I was in Europe? It just seems like an out of place thing to be talking about. So the idea is that here we are finishing up the book of Genesis. Certainly the first parsha in the book of Genesis. In the beginning, it formulates everything which is going to come after it. And yet we have here, which is no less important, because what happens here is that no longer is the Jewish people really one small family. The Jewish people after this really become a nation. That because of this group of Jacob's descendants, these 70 people become, over a couple hundred years, they grow to become all the Hebrews. And then of course that's the nation, that we know. And so this is really the moment when basically we go from Jacob's large family, but a family nonetheless, to an actual nation. And so the reason he's talking here, and he's constantly talking about the past, is that he's saying that you need to, as you embark this family and you suddenly become a nation, you need to understand where we're coming from. He talks about Abraham and Sarah because he says, if you're going to be a nation, you have to know what our nation is about. You have to know that this was a nation, forged in difficulty and challenge and all of that, and you need to know where it's coming from. And he's talking about himself with the blessings of God, because you don't just need to know, that they challenge and they work hard, but you need to know this is a divine promise. And I think that's why that's coming, because this is basically, almost think of it as this is not the end of the book of Genesis, but it's almost the beginning of the next quest, where he basically looks at his family and says, I'm going to leave you here. There's certainly a parallel later on with Moses. I'm going to leave you here. I'm going to end it. I'm not going to continue. But you know what? Remember that we're here not just because of a divine promise, but we worked really hard to be here, and we're going to have this certain impact on the nations. Of course, that is Or Lagoyim, light unto nations. And I think that that's the reason this comes at the end of the book of Genesis, because the end of the book of Genesis signifies this next step, this next journey that's going to be taken. And I think that that's also the significance when Jacob is blessing his two grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh, who are the sons of Joseph. And of course, Manasseh is the oldest son, but nonetheless he blesses Ephraim first. And Joseph says, why are you doing this? And the idea here is that, again, he looks to the past, but it's not exclusive. In other words, if he were only looking to the past from a historical perspective, he would say, well, Manasseh was born first, therefore I shall give Manasseh the higher blessing. But when we look at the past, it's not simply in a matter of historical, it's a matter of looking forward. In other words, when we look at the past, we're supposed to glean lessons and say, if it means that Jacob was given this blessing from God, if it means that Abraham and Sarah, fought against the inertia of the world to proclaim monotheism and the existence of one God, what that means is that he's looking back not from a historian's perspective, but from a perspective of, that's what they did, we need to move forward and we need to, basically kickstart this. And I think that that's the idea of why Jacob blessed his younger grandson before the older grandson, because he's not just looking from history in terms of one grandson was born first, he's looking from perspective of which one has more potential, which one is going to push. and which one indeed is going to have the future of the Jewish people. And so the idea here again is that we look to the past, and Jacob is here looking to the past, not just as a simple curiosity and, because it's in the past we study it. We study it because this is how we know who we are, and not just who we are, this is how we know what our goal is and what we're going to push for in the future. So that's it for this week. Best wishes, Shabbat Shalom, God bless.